My guests are here, and we're doing 4 hours of some sort of a review of the biggest issues that were on the front pages of your minds in the course of the year. We are talking about the banking crisis. We're talking about men's gold. We're talking about the war on corruption. Is it simply lip service? We're talking about creation of new regions. Really? Okay. And there were 100% turnouts in some of the places. Clara has asked the question, no single person fell sick, no single person was dead. The EC says it will investigate certain matters. We'll look at all of those and a plethora of other, thorny issues that came up. The Commonwealth Games scandal, that shameful thing, was investigated, right, by the police. No report whatsoever. Nobody was guilty of anything, or it really never happened. It did happen, correct? Okay. So we'll ask some of the questions. I know I'm hated and liked in equal measure for simply asking these questions, and I'll do them. Ace Ankoma is a lawyer. Clara Berry Kasati is a lawyer and teaches at the Gimpa Law Faculty. Bright Simmons is Honorary Vice President, Imani, Africa, and member, Africa Strategy Group, World Economic Forum. Amanda Clinton is a lawyer and counsel for multiple men's gold clients. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to Newsfile.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. Okay, so forget about Ace, he's pretending. You hear him shortly. You hear him shortly. Right, so we are beginning the first segment on the matters or the bank crisis that, has had the potential of affecting the economy of this country. So let me begin on this note. The Minister of Finance was in Parliament to deliver the economic budget statement for 2019 and check what he had to say. I want to use that as a prelude for this one. He says at paragraph 33 of his statement that, Mr. Speaker, since the assumption of office by the current administration of the Bank of Ghana, bold measures have been taken to restore the health and resilience of the banking sector and to clamp down on unlicensed deposit-taking financial houses. In addition to the 2 insolvent banks that were closed last year by the Bank of Ghana, 5 more were closed in August this year for insolvency and other infractions of the law. Rescuing the situation regarding these 7 banks has so far cost some, listen up, 9.9 billion, not million, billion in monies that government had not budgeted for and could have surely been put in good use to fix our numerous infrastructural needs such as roads, bridges, hospitals, schools, housing, etc. The government has continued to provide assurances to depositors and customers of licensed banks and specialized deposit-taking institutions through demonstrable actions that their deposits are safe. Indeed, following the creation of the Consolidated Bank Ghana Limited, a wholly owned government of Ghana and licensed by the Bank of Ghana as a universal bank, the government capitalized it with 450 million. In addition, government had to issue a bond with a face value of 7.6 billion. You got that? 7.6 billion Ghana cedis to cover the gap between the deposit liabilities and the remaining good assets of the 5 banks involved. This singular action of government has reposed confidence in the banking system because it will ensure that no deposit of any single one of the 1.2 million unsuspecting depositors will be lost, and customers will continue to access their deposits without difficulty and renew their confidence in the financial sector. The last paragraph I read. Through government's intervention, in August this year, deposits of some 11.0 billion Ghana cedis have been saved, as well as some 2,661 jobs, in addition to several hundreds saved in 2017 from the insolvent two banks that were closed in 2017. The government action has also created a strong indigenous Ghanaian bank in place of the 5 failed banks. The government is committed to ensuring that Consolidated Bank Ghana Limited becomes a strong customer-oriented indigenous bank well-positioned to meet the demands of all its customers and to serve as the go-to bank for the financing small and medium-scale enterprises and corporate Ghana. Right, so I pause here and go direct to my guest to make an assessment of how far we have come with resolving the problems, including the promised prosecutions. But first, let's listen to the president give us further assurance about what we should expect.
Amounts in excess of 400 million cedis have so far been recovered by the receivers of the 2 banks closed last year. The government has set up a special investigations team to undertake criminal investigations into the failures of all 7 banks for possible prosecutions by the relevant state agencies. No one found complicit will be spared. The Bank of Ghana is conducting its own internal investigations into the conduct of its officials, past and present, that could have facilitated wrongdoing at these banks.
Right, you're back. And I start with Bright Simmons. Now, Bright, you were here in this studio and we were so excited to have you give us such a rare, different perspective on the banking crisis. And I remember at the time we also discussed men's gold. How many months on from UT and Capital at the beginning in 2017 up to this point, what will be your assessment of what we promised to do and how much of it we as a nation have been able to do? I'll post a disclaimer first, or is it a disclaimer, a disclosure first, that in one of the banks, I am among a number of, my firm is among a number of lawyers who are mounting a defense for one of them. So go ahead.
I mean, it's a very broad topic, so I'll just touch on the surface and then hopefully in the subsequent discussion we can delve into some of the more important dynamics later on. First, there was, to my mind, a very impressive early response initiative from the bank when the situation threatened to get out of hand. I think those decisions, early decisions around placing some of the banks on administration, et cetera, were on point. Going forward, there's been a marked decline in the quality of the intervention and the willingness of the bank to take the very bold decisions that they now need to take going forward to restructure not just these specific banks that had issues, but other banks that are clearly facing liquidity problems very similar to what the other banks faced. You are quite aware that there's ongoing disputes about the equity and the fairness of the intervention, about whether these being balance sheet insolvency issues rather than cash flow insolvency issues, the Bank of Ghana should have gone as hard as it did. But the truth of the matter is that there are very systemic risks that if the bank had not intervened, could completely have exacerbated these issues that were confronting the nation, the financial sector at that time. And I think, therefore, that those early steps were very critical. And we saw that earlier on, growth 2016 to 2017 financial year showed that the impacts appeared quite limited. We saw 30% growth to private sector, etc. And in our budgets, we trumpeted it. to suggest that we've contained the problem. A year on, it's clear that there were lagging indicators that are suddenly, all of a sudden, making, impacting the dynamics and making it very clear that this problem was bigger than we thought. Banking sector GDP declined almost 18%. We've seen a decline in private sector growth of credit to private sector by almost 300 basis points. Very important. We've seen a situation where net foreign assets have declined almost by 6%. And it's being cushioned by increasing quantitative easing, almost a 40% in net domestic assets. What is going to happen eventually in 2019 is a huge buildup of pressure on the cedi. And as we begin to realize that some of the interventions that were promised were not as cleanly executed as we thought. So the bond, the famous bond that the government continues to talk about, we know for sure that those funds are not completely available to the Consolidated Bank in order to pay the claims that their creditors have on them. So people that have made placements in the banks that have been resolved are having difficulty because they are being asked to take very significant hairline cuts. I've heard 7.5% average returns instead of, in some cases, 27%. Some of the beige contracts I saw were in excess of 30%. Mm-hmm. So all those impacts are going to build up in 2019. So 2018 was essentially a lot of people giving the government a lot of slack, cutting the government a lot of slack because of the early responsiveness that it showed.
Okay, you had said that you were happy about the quick intervention. However, there has been a decline in the quality of the interventions. I don't understand what you mean by that. That the two banks, collapsed in not exactly collapsed really, merged, or as it were, assumed by the Bank of Ghana, the commercial bank. They have made recoveries of 15% of their total loan stock. We understand that the greatest value of the bank's assets is in the loan stock, which constitutes approximately 70% of the total assets of 3.9 billion of the banks, and this is at the heart of the recovery efforts. The total loan stock of the two banks only amounted to 2.7 billion as at the date of receivership. So 15%, is that what you mean? There's a decline in the quality, because that's not much.
No, I mean, the problem is very simple. When the administration was terminated, was it sometime around August when we first came to the studio for the 5 banks? It was done on the basis that the Bank of Ghana has now collated enough information. It was completely convinced that this was not a redeemable situation, and very extraordinary interventions had to be taken.
Right.
Let's not get it wrong. I mean, globally, when it comes to determining insolvency in financial institutions, it's very different, kettle of fish from normal institutions. If the regulator says you are insolvent, invariably you are insolvent.
Right.
Because it's about credit assessment. It's not really like the standard, entity where you have balance sheet insolvency or cash flow insolvency, and you have some room to argue your way out. In banking insolvency around the world, the regulator has plenary powers that are extraordinary in scope. So my view is that those powers were well exerted when they decided that they were going to terminate the administration. But then the law requires them that they produce a report, the administrator produce a report that gives us an idea of the roadmap towards recovery of assets, etc., etc.
Okay.
If those reports have been given to the Bank of Ghana, it's incumbent on it to advise us what are the core findings which are now guiding the receivership process. I understand that obviously civil actions have been instituted to try and claw back some of that money. That's important. But there is a lack of transparency in terms of the bank's further actions. And that is compounding the problem in the industry as we speak. The fund management industry in Ghana is on the brink of collapse. Talk to industry players. There is huge uncertainty. There is a lot of a dramatic fall in confidence. And all of that is due to the fact that it's not clear whether the government is willing to do what it takes to make the liquidity available to resolve issues which are liquidity based or liquidity derived. So a simple example is this bond that the Consolidated Bank says is waiting to cash in. How do you cash in a bond? A bond is issued, and if the proceeds are realized, then the money is available. So what does it mean? That it's not a check, it's not some kind of instrument that matures at a later date. The proceeds in the bond, if they are indeed available, should have been realized, and that money should be available so that Consolidated Bank should pay all. Let's not forget, even if you had deposit insurance, fund managers and the rest will not be considered small depositors, so they wouldn't qualify. So for these people, they expect that they can realize as much of the assets as possible. So people that are, banks, savings and loans companies, microfinance companies, other funds, mutual funds and unit trusts, etc., that have made placements in all of these 5 institutions, expect to receive their money so that they can also settle their obligations. Now, you have a situation where they have obligations that they cannot settle because their money is locked up somewhere. There's a bond that the government has issued, has already started to recognize it as part of the public sector debt stock. And yes, the money is not available. So that lack of transparency, that lack of clarity, this inability to update the market, to make it absolutely clear what is happening, is a problem.
And when you talk about the decline in quality of the interventions, interventions you applaud, that without which what the Bank of Ghana feared, the contagion effect, would have been catastrophic. Even though it is still being said that there is a lot that has happened to the other financial institutions in this country, that they are hemorrhaging. Now, it is important not to add the first 2 to the second 5 to make the same argument. It is for the first 2, UT and Capital, that over 1 year period, we have only recovered 15% of the loan stock, 400 million. But for the 5,
but if you say we've recovered 15%, it depends on the maturity profile of these assets.
Right.
I mean, if they have a 5-year loan, just the fact that you are in receivership doesn't mean I have.
The 5 banks this year, the Unibank, Royal Bank, Beige Bank, Sovereign Bank, and Construction Bank. How will you justify your comments decline in the quality of the interventions? That's too early, isn't it?
So my concern is not just with the receivership process, for which we have too little information actually to make reasonable comments.
Okay.
My concerns are about the quality of the information that is available to the financial sector, particularly the financial industry, in order to make judgments about the recovery. If you have 5 banks collapse, literally, and there is clear evidence of a fall in confidence in the sector, people are willing to understand whether, when you've seen an ongoing liquidity crisis, so there are institutions that I will not name for obvious reasons, that cannot pay when the obligations come due. We all know them. And there are tens of them. My view is that the Bank of Ghana has to indicate whether the ongoing restructuring is proceeding or not. Because the problems that arose, for which reason some of these banks were resolved compulsorily, mandatory resolution of these banks, persist. So if you have a policy direction around how you deal with these problems, then you either be consistent and say that, yes, they persist, but we don't think that for these specific instances, a particular threshold has been breached. And then what is that threshold? You cannot say that we're not just going to say anything. We're just going to sit there and do what we want because we are at Bank of Ghana and nobody can compel us to talk. Or if you are the SEC, which I'm sure we're going to delve into them in great detail, has for a very long time, has been almost aloof. I mean, it's like we are not responsible to anyone to explain what is our policy for managing this situation, etc. So the question of intervention is first and foremost in respect to the information that is available for industry participants to rely upon. It's very important. Much of the financial industry is an informational industry. It's the information that is available to make determinations around price discovery, asset pricing, etc. So when that information is not available, you distort the market. So that's number 1. Number 2, there are requirements in terms of disclosures where it's not obvious that those requirements in the law were completely upheld. And some of us have made those complaints for a long time. Thirdly, this problem intertwines with other problems in the regulatory landscape, which compounds them. So this issue around minimum capital, which some of us have complained about the way that it's been managed, is going to become another problem next year, because either the Bank of Ghana gets bold and actually revokes 10 licenses, or at the very minimum 8 licenses, or it postpones it, in which case it will have done great damage to those banks that were forced to take suboptimal decisions because of this artificial deadline. So
you say 10 or 8 licenses because, as we know by now, that about 20 or at least 22 will meet the minimum requirements.
So that 22
out of the 30 universal banks.
You see, those 22 includes those whose strategies for mobilizing the capital have been approved by the Bank of Ghana.
Right.
But there is still no certainty that they've actually met, some of them, have actually met the 400 million Ghana cedi requirement. Why? Because in some instances, mergers have been done, but it's not clear that the valuation after the merger implies that those assets are available for use as reserve capital or as equity.
Okay.
And now, several other factors.
Right. Now, I'll ask you this very final question for this round. Now, the governor of the Bank of Ghana, Philip Addison, had indicated... Ernest Addison, sorry. Okay, Philip, good morning. Had indicated that there were some weaknesses caused by macroeconomic factors. There were a trend of poor corporate governance, poor risk management practices, related party transactions that were not above board, regulatory non-compliance, and poor supervision, which overtook questionable licensing processes and weak supervision. Have you been satisfied? You've already spoken about the decline in the quality of the interventions. Have you been satisfied, or are you hopeful of what was the initial clarion call?
So let me
prosecute.
Let me summarize my concern here. In the jurisdictions where they have extensive experience doing this, let's take the US, which is the most studied of these jurisdictions. You have a public sector institution that typically does these resolutions and manages the administration, the receivership. So the FDIC, for instance, in the US. And in those instances, it's a clear public sector management of the crisis, for which reason information is readily available. In our situation where you have an ad hoc liquidator or administrator or receiver or whatever you want to call it, and it's complete private sector, the attitude to transparency, which will allow public-oriented analysts such as ourselves to do a good job of analyzing the situation, is not the same. So if it's PwC and they institute a civil action to recover some money, you don't expect them to come and brief the press, because that's not how they operate.
Okay.
So because we don't have that, I expect at a very minimum that the Bank of Ghana will appoint somebody in the bank or affiliated with the bank whose job is to do periodic briefing of the public about the process. So if you institute a civil action, you say we want to recover this amount, there are now counter claims, etc., etc. What is the bank's posture to these claims? What is the strategy going forward beyond the recovery from these people? Because when you said there are related party transactions that are not above board, in layman terms, what we're saying is that people have taken money from the bank, misapplied it, given it to themselves, etc., etc.,
right,
and in a way abused public confidence, because these institutions are not purely private, if you look at banks carefully. Now, my position is that in those kind of circumstances, you don't only assume that because the receiver is in court and is using the court process to recover the funds, the industry is not interested in understanding the overall policy direction of the Bank of Ghana in addressing these matters.
Okay.
And because public sector information or information in the public domain is not available, and the court process by its very nature being adversarial, it's not designed to bring out information for people to make sound judgment.
Right.
We have a huge limitation.
They are listening, and that sounds like free advice to carry the people along with them, because this is a huge national public interest matter. So I'm sorry for those of you who felt that these matters, because they have aspects of them in court, should not be discussed on national radio. You're wrong. Now, Ace, this is what the finance minister also said. We have heard the president just say a while ago in the clip that we played, that the government's financial intervention in the cleanup exercise have been necessary to help mitigate the socio-economic impact arising out of the closure of the failed financial institutions. Here's the point. It is important that the cost of these interventions, borne by you and I sitting here, the taxpayers, are recovered to the extent possible through recoveries from debtors, shareholders and related and connected parties who through unfair means siphoned funds from the defunct banks to the detriment of the depositors, employees, other stakeholders, and the economy as a whole. He didn't end there, but spoke about, how the prosecutions should be expected. And government people have continued to say these things. What confidence do you have in us recovering how much of the 9.9 billion Ghana cedis of taxpayers' money put into these failed banks?
When I heard that the figure 9.9 billion, billion, and this is Ghana cedis.
Yes.
I said, ouch. I wonder whether that money would, what that money would have done for the economy of this country if it had been available for its original purpose, instead of now it being given out to people. Basically, these are monies that Ghanaians have put into these banks with precious little to no prospects of recovering from them. And so the government has to provide these monies through these entities to Ghanaians. I like to break it down into very simple terms. And thanks, Bright, for breaking down related party transactions to all of us. That is not what is related. It's basically somebody has set up a financial institution and has used this as his personal piggy bank, or his personal pocketbook, or her personal pocketbook.
One of the reports said so.
I see. As they say, fools seldom differ, great minds think alike. So now, the question many Ghanaians ask is that, all right, jail them, but what happens to the money? Has the government system been able to track every line of so-called related party expenditure, which was simply a means by which people siphon money from the banks into either their personal pockets or the pockets of their friends and relatives? I believe the audit process should track every dime. I am also aware that some of the audit processes have hit a brick wall, because you see a transaction and there was no money backing the transaction. You see, there's a transaction, there's a paper transaction, or there's been movement of money and the transactional documentation does not exist. Look, Samson, for years I think that many people have suspected that the banking industry, the finance sector of Ghana, had a soft underbelly, and all the nice profits that were being churned out was simply because many of them were basically glorified treasuries, where all they did was to bank on treasury bills, and which is interest-free, risk-free, because technically the government does not default. So many of the banks really were sitting down and raking in easy money. Then people got cleverer. Soon they started taking the government's money and investing in the government. So they'll take government money and buy treasury bills from the government. So the government gets its own money back and pays interest on it. It became a means of doing business. As regulation began to fail, they got bolder. Now, my banker friends, when I say, they say, shut up, Ace, you don't understand our industry. But it became a practice that if, for example, Samson, you run Joy FM, and you're in charge of finances, and you decide to take your money, the Joy FM's money, not your money, 100 million cedis, into Bank X at an interest, Bank X will pay you a so-called commission. You are the head of the institution. Complete breach of your fiduciary duties to your company. And a donkey dressed up in any way is still an ass. This is bribery. That instead of paying Joy FM, let's say 10%, they'll pay Joy FM 7% and pay you 3% off the top. Now, when they began to realize that those transactions could be tracked back, why is Samson, the MD of Joy FM, getting 3% of money that don't belong to him, but it's for Joy FM that it brought in? They call it various names: facilitation, account retention, whatever. They describe it in such nice terms. But basically, they were giving you a cut. What they started doing is that they started paying it to their staff. That it is staff. Why? Who brought the money? But staff, why knows that when he gets that 180,000 cedis, he must quickly siphon all of it to you, probably keep a portion of it. It became the practice. So soon, the breach of the law became the norm. And so it was then at a point we decided that let's have an easy situation. Let's distribute banking licenses like confetti. And so entities that were almost insolvent in themselves, managed to get banking licenses. Microfinance institutions, savings and loans companies that had poor books were able to cook their books and acquire banking licenses. That it was possible that if they are asking for 60 million, you probably have 10, and you cook paper to cover the rest, and you sent it to Bank of Ghana, and they joyfully signed you up and gave you a license. Which means that the new bank starts with zero capital, probably negative capital. Then it got more interesting. Well, if you can cross one, then you try two. So now, let's start using the bank's monies in the way that we please. And as we do it, we keep on cooking the books. It's as if the offense of falsification accounts never existed. So they started cooking the books for Bank of Ghana. And some suspect with the complicity of officials of Bank of Ghana. They just cooked the books. The books did not make sense. It didn't add up. So-called investments had never been placed. Yet you see an investment profile, an investment book, which says we've placed X money with Bright, a certain amount with Amanda, some with Clara. No monies have ever gone to Bright, Clarice, and Amanda. Where did those, but the monies left the bank. When the Bank of Ghana discovered them, if they ever did, they did next to nothing. Sometimes they gave them a list to comply with. They didn't comply with the next year, and nothing happened. So this thing was going to collapse. Right, and the blame. And easy lies that wears the crown. The buck stopped with Bank of Ghana. I'm sorry. Bright understands the economics of it. I only understand the legal aspects of it. That the Bank of Ghana had the power, immense power, even under the previous Banking Act, to stop this. They did not. Then they got bolder. After running down their banks and the banks not having any money, they went to Bank of Ghana for emergency funds. That is a quick tide over. We need money overnight. And you could take Bank of Ghana overnight funds and round trip them through another company to buy shares. Whoa, this will not happen in the US. I'm sorry, Bryce was giving the example of the US. You'll be arrested the next day. And so first of all, they started off with poor foundation. They chopped their own money and then began to chop your money and mine. And Bank of Ghana did nothing. Right. To a certain extent. But at some point, they passed a law. When they saw that this was going to collapse, they rushed and passed a very strong, I think that the Bank of Ghana is probably the strongest central bank in the world right now, if you look at the Act 980. It's
a monster.
A pleasant monster, if you ask me. but even between the passage of the law and till nothing happened. They continue to act as if the old law was in place. The previous law says, don't give out liquidity support without security. They were giving it out without security. And as we are seeing the records, and maybe the court actually might prove them true or not true, it became a point that if you took the government's liquidity support, you paid a percentage to certain people in authority. So not only was our money being dished out, also like confetti, part of our money that was supposed to rescue the banks was allegedly being used to pay public officials.
Okay.
So this had become, and I think the word contagion is too big. It had become effectively it's a culture. The culture became one where the law was not regarded. Okay. And to me, if you do not regard the law, you're simply going to collapse. So what we're seeing, to my mind, is a system where decisions were taken to flout the law, knowing that the law can never bite. And so, what is happening? I think the civil actions are in play are right. Maybe some of these things we have read are not the case. The people get their day in court to prove that Bank of Ghana, PwC, whatever, were wrong. But the Bank of Ghana and everybody, the receivers, the administrators, also get the opportunity to prove that what our investigations say we found is true.
Okay.
If it is, then the law will kick in.
Right.
But the criminal prosecutions is the other part. We'll deal with that.
So what we are doing here is that we are not in the courtroom, and we do not intend to pretend as though we were the judges in the courtroom. So we're dealing with the matters as we know them in the public, as the Bank of Ghana has brought them forward to us. We are not dealing with them as they are argued in court. So please take note of that. Now, the most important stage we are in now is that taxpayers want to have an idea, and that's why I asked the question. What is your faith in how much we can get of the 9.9 billion back, and how do we get it? Will we get it at all?
Well, if the civil actions lead to a determination of liability, and when these happen in the spectrum of the law, the people who are targeted are the directors of the companies to the extent that they are complicit. I mean, if a director can say, look, I was hoodwinked all the time, I was giving false information at board meetings, then you probably would walk off as not liable. So the directors have principal liability, the shareholders to the extent that they got a play in this, people who are beneficiaries. And the law will lift the veil and go after everybody. Tracing, the principle of tracing would trace the money, because the monies in the bank are technically a trust. And so if you move trust monies, the law will disregard the movement and track it into whatever it has been into. Now, how much of it can we recover? To the extent that there are assets. Because we know that in civil action, you cannot go to jail for not paying money you owe. So to the extent that
Women would have been in jail a long time ago.
Well, okay, Samson, lead me not into temptation. This is the end of the year. I promised I was going to be a good boy today. Now, so it's to the extent that assets exist against which execution may be levied. Else you and I know that you'll be throwing good money after bad if you go through the whole process of a civil action and there are no assets to proceed against. And so to the extent that these monies can be traced into the hands of whoever has acquired them, then there could be recoveries. But if the man has lined his belly with the monies and has lived large and has gained weight, you can't do anything about it. The monies are gone. So if there are assets, that is why all of us as Ghanaians ought to be interested in how these trials are going, how these cases are going in court. To the extent that there are still assets, whether in Ghana or elsewhere, and this could be traced, yes. The criminal side, I'm not too confident about.
Why?
Okay, let me get into trouble. You see something? I was telling Bright that my emoji for 2018 Ghana is that of a heartbreak. And I think it's in the personal realization that maybe, as they say, me myself,
You're not cut out for it.
I'm probably not cut out for this public advocacy thing. Or I'm probably not cut out for hard edge. I mean, let's be honest. I've known you for several years. Let me give you an honest assessment. If I am in a position to prosecute you, and they bring your file to me, and I find that you are guilty, I'll resign from the position. Because my conclusion about Ghana, now let me get into trouble, is that this is one large compound house where relationships, money, friendship, power matter and are considered weightier than law and principles. If I decide in a position of authority to prosecute you, my relatives will ask, oh, Aden, Uni Adamfo, don't you recognize your relationship with Samson all of these years? And I will be a hypocrite if I will say that those words won't hit me. So one day I sat down and thought through all of this and said, you know what? I am no better. We are all the same. It is one large compound house. So that's my heartbreak, that I really don't see these things gaining traction. Because if they would, there would have been prosecutions by now in the various Ponzi schemes, without mentioning any current or past Ponzi. Who has gone to jail for running a Ponzi scheme in Ghana? We read of attempted prosecutions. We heard people were given bail. Have we seen the end of it? Let's just use simple Ponzi. The Ponzi schemes break like 5 laws at the same time. We have had Ponzi schemes running in this country for decades.
So hey, just hold it.
Not a single person has been prosecuted.
Just hold it. We'll get to the other side.
So you invited
of this
my heart to
discussion.
break. Sorry, Samson.
Right.
I'm sorry to dampen the...
Right. And you see, it just spoke about something in a manner that reminded me of an interaction with an attorney general of this republic. That said, and we'll bring aspects of that when we are discussing the matter of corruption. That looked me and said, look me in the eye and say that if my party stalwart or party financier, I was asked to prosecute them, can you look me in the eye and say I'll be able to prosecute them? I definitely can't. I won't lie to you, it won't work. So Clara.
Clara is very
bold. Yes.
She's bolder than me.
From where Ace just stopped.
Yes.
May I push you into a certain point where you look at it from this way? He says, if there are assets can we take away the if and talk about how to preserve any assets? Because we seem to say we know for a fact that there ought to be assets. Related parties, we have spoken about that for almost all the banks. So how do we do that in hope of victory eventually?
Now, as to how we can trace the asset, honestly, you would need a lot more information about the processes where the assets are before you can boldly say how. But what I do know, like Ace said, you can trace the money. Trust money is trust money. So you can trace it several folds, 10 to the last person. So you can start from one and trace in whose hands it arrived at a particular point in time and trace to the next, to the very last destination, the beneficiary of that trust money, and you can take it back. Nothing can stop you from that. So the fact that the assets may have left the hands of the immediate persons who received the assets when the problem started, it's not a problem if we are dedicated and committed to tracing the assets based on the investigation.
My question is when? So that you don't begin this exercise when it's been dissipated.
This should have been done already. This should have been done already. We should have not waited till today to start tracing the assets. This problem wasn't a surprise. I mean, we all know that. This was no surprise. So at the time that the assets were being dissipated, I am very sure Bank of Ghana knew about it. So this really it comes back to one, we all agree, like A said, the truth of the matter is that the primary reason why we are where we are today is regulatory failure.
But
it's
again,
Bank of Ghana.
Again on assets, is there legal power or authority to commence that now in hope that the state is victorious?
There is. Why is there no? Okay. Trust assets are nobody. Yeah, trust assets do not rightly belong to any other person who other than the person that they were held in trust for. So there is. They are not out of time for.
No, we are familiar with dealing with matters that will end, and we know this is Ghana, that will end after 2-3 years or more.
So that's where
the problem is. And then we come back to tell the people that we are sorry. We went looking for this. It was at this number. We can find it.
So the problem really is whether we are committed and determined to find it, not whether we can or whether we have the right to. So this whole problem, including tracing the assets, really is commitment and determination. It's whether we are committed to doing the right thing or whether we want to do the right thing. So if we are determined, we are that determined, we are smart enough, we are intelligent enough, we are competent enough, we have very competent people, that if they were determined to do their work and trace the assets, they can get them. Right. So the issue really isn't the issue of competence. The issue, like I'm saying, is the very issue that has led us to where we are. And Ace just alluded to it. The way we do things, most of the time, because of the principle of relationships, I take the position that if we look at other developed economies and we want what they have, we must be willing to do what they do to get what they have. But we cannot sit wanting what they have, but not wanting to put in the hard work that would let us get to what they are. And we can't talk our way through it. We can't always be talking about what is the right thing to do and what is the right thing not to do. And then we don't do it. It's the talking that has led us. Bank of Ghana was talking and writing. When Bank of Ghana had a lot of power to act and halt the situation, they didn't. It would have been the acting that would have saved the situation. The Bank of Ghana has an obligation to protect the public. That must always be your number one concern, protection of the public. So the very issues, so I actually come back, I've always been worried about issues of relationship. To be fair, to be honest with you, Samson, if I have to prosecute you and the evidence is there, I'm sorry, but I will.
Sharp.
And if I am a judge and you are convicted, I will convict you.
That's what he just said,
But whilst you are in jail, I will take care of your family.
Okay.
Why would you do that? He's a criminal, he's stealing money.
No, but that is a friendship bet.
Okay.
I don't dislike you. I don't hate you. I understand that you are human. I'm even prepared in the human element to accept that you made a mistake and for which you should be forgiven. But I have a job to do.
Okay.
and I'm going to do that job. So once you are in jail, I would gladly sentence you.
Okay.
If the evidence requires that you be sentenced.
Okay.
But once you are in jail, I will make sure that your family is well provided for.
Okay.
You'll be conflicted, Judge. You jail him and look after his family. I like that. Please jail me.
No, but on a more serious note, I think as Ghanaians, we do need some self-introspection if we are going to get to where we are. I am always for Ghanaian indigenous businesses. So my heart breaks, like my senior said, that the banks involved in this are all indigenous banks.
Right.
They were not, it's not only Ghana, there are other banks operating in Ghana. So why didn't they have the problems that we have? And we know why. So if we know what our problem is, we've done this for a long time. We've seen that it has hurt us. I think it is high time that we all looked one another in the face and said that, look, we have a responsibility to do the right thing.
So
And that if you don't do the right thing, you shouldn't take it personally.
What have you seen being done after the revocation of the various licenses, and how confident are you that the results will be good?
I wish it's difficult because if I'm going to be very honest, I have no reason to be confident. That's what I would say. And I say I have no reason to be confident because I have not been given any reason to be confident. I would have expected that, I expected to see a lot more commitment and we should be quick about it. I know about the speeches. So this is not the time for us to commit and state how we are determined to resolve this problem. I just want to see action. And I want to see determined action. And I want to see this done quickly. Because as we all know, we will drag this on, we will talk about it in the next two years, we'll forget about this, and then we go on.
So when you say quickly, quick action, are you looking at the civil process to recover or a criminal process?
Both.
Both. At the same time?
In fact, so far I haven't actually even had any attempt to bring in shadow directors. If you look at the reports that we have, you can tell that sometimes other people who were not officially directors were running affairs. Under the law, you can fix them with liabilities of a director.
Absolutely.
So for such people, rope them in. So that next time, or I know the other thing, next time other people realize that if you don't have official obligation, do not think that because your name is not written as director of this, you can indirectly run affairs, and then when there is trouble, you will hide behind the person you put in and director and say, well, this person was the director, the buck stops with him.
Okay.
You can be,
so
you
let
can
me
be
get
roped in as a shadow
director. Let me get
director.
Amanda's, shall I call you Amanda or Clinton?
Amanda's preferable.
Right. So let me get Amanda's, brief comments about the general banking crisis matter. And she's here for a specific purpose. And we're getting into that next discussion after we hear briefly from Brett Simmons on what his expectations are, or faith is, about how much we can get back and how we can get it back. Yes, so what's your reading of what has happened over the period and the processes so far?
I think ultimately the banking sector is going through an overhaul because depositors have to be protected, and it's to protect the Ghanaian economy eventually. So there's always a bit of not a blip, but a bit of a tough period in between that. So we do believe that, things will eventually get sorted out, but in aiming for the top in terms of sanitizing the banking sector, it's also imperative that people are held accountable. Right. And it's not just this phrase that you say and then nothing gets done. It's not everybody being so connected in this ancestral relationship almost, where, do you know what I mean? Where you just can't prosecute them, you can't do anything, and accountability and transparency doesn't exist. And so that's the reality on the ground, because being transparent and being accountable means that no matter how much money you have, you can't talk your way out of it, you can't negotiate your way out of it, you can't influence your way out of it. And if we get this country to the standard where we have officials in place who actually revel in making people accountable, I mean, their paycheck might be so little, but there's some countries in this world where it is, you have to profile the people you're employing. They actually revel in making people accountable. They revel in taking money away that was not gotten ill-gotten ways, and they revel the fact that you try and offer them something because they can charge you for trying to offer them money and then add that to your list of crimes. But if you're not employing such people, and if the whole system is corrupt because of the culture, then we have to address that, because it's not just a speech, it's not just something you say.
So from your perspective, from your observation, we simply don't revel in these ideals that you speak about.
Yes, I mean, if you watch...
Then it's a lost game.
It's a lost game, because you have to have people whose heart is in... like, it's their day and night job to go through the financial forensics of people's organization to say, oh, so this is what you guys were doing, so this is where the movement went, this is what you're really about. And, in other countries, it really does happen like that. People aren't about the money necessarily. They just really can't stand the idea of someone, taking money from other people, and they have to be held accountable.
Okay.
That's it.
Right. Now,